Okay, I just realized it's really dark in here. Okay, wish I could add some more light. Well, because it's morning. It's right now. It's 6 a.m. So it'll start lighting up in a half hour or so. By the time this is over. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so this was supposed to have been transmitted yesterday, but I ran out of time before I had to take care of things, and a lot of little details have to be done before we start these last 3 days of Holy Week, and the Triduum they call it, to finish up Lent and celebrating Easter. And the reason why I'm doing this video is this week is for you to understand why we do this at all. We've been doing this week for thousands of years since the day that Moses led the Jewish people out of slavery in Egypt into their freedom. So this is nothing new, okay? But the meaning for us as Christians has altered. There still is that sense of the Passover. So before we start, I just want to open up with a simple prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Oh. Si está mirando esto en español es porque ustedes no se fijaron que ayer hice este video en español. Busca el video en español, ¿ok? Vale. All right, so here we are. God's peace to you, blessings upon you, your home and everything, and etc. So why are we here? This is the time of Passover. This was the time that Jesus was executed. So as we went through reading through the Gospel of Mark, we read about the Passover, okay? We read how God liberated his people. We read about how Jesus Christ suffered and what each day he did in his last week, coming in triumphantly into Jerusalem on the first day of the week, but by the sixth day of the week, he was being executed. All right. So we read that whole thing, and you've read, of course, Mark chapter 16. I sure hope so. That's the whole thing about the resurrection. But I'm hoping you're rereading each day as I gave it to you to do. You're rereading each day what Jesus was doing, rereading the scriptures, getting all of that into your head. Like I said, these are the words that Christians memorized in order to become Christians. Okay? We have prayers, and we have the creed, we have the things we call the catechism that we use. Nice. It's nice stuff, okay? It's great, all right? But it's the life of Jesus that we have to enter into completely. So along with the creed and everything, the statement of our beliefs, this is why we believe. So we're really studying why we believe this at all. All right. So what I'm going to do is read to you. This is from the book of Exodus, chapter 12. This is what Jesus was celebrating with his disciples while he was going to undergo all the terrible tortures, etc. It's called the Passover. It literally means that. It means Passover. The angel of death passed over the Jewish people to kill the firstborn males of the Egyptian people. There's going to be a word that, we use that phrase firstborn. Okay. It's always a male, and it has to be the first child that opened the womb of the mother. Okay. Not just the first boy that was born, because you're going to have a lot of girls and then all of a sudden have a boy. That's not your firstborn. That's not a firstborn male. A lot of privileges and rights came to the firstborn male, the male that opened the womb of his mother. In other words, it was her first live birth. So she was able to give birth to a son as the first child. And that was rewarded heavenly. They thought that was the greatest blessing that a man and woman could receive. Sorry, all you daughters. Don't worry. When I was single, before I became a priest, all I wanted to do was have a bunch of daughters. I didn't want any boys. I wanted all daughters. Okay, all right. The girls are cool, so don't worry about it. God thinks so too. These are man-made customs. All this stuff, but it was important. The firstborn males that were the first childs of their mother, these are the ones that were killed on the 10th plague. But it's very important to understand that these very privileged children were the main leaders of their houses. They're going to be the first leaders of their houses. They were the ones who were going to have the rights to everything. They would receive all the inheritance. They had a lot of privileges, not just in Jewish culture, Egyptian culture, and all sorts of cultures. Even to this day, there's still a special pride that your first child is a boy instead of a girl. I still see it in disappointment in the faces of many people. Thank God, not so many men. The women tend to do that, but the men, they're very proud of their daughters. I'm very happy to see that. And if they're not, they're fools. Okay? It's a wonderful gift, all right? Boys are great. I'm a boy. Okay. So I like being a boy because that's what I am. All right. But it's not just being a boy doesn't make you better than the girl. But this is the way we've been thinking for a very long time, and it's still in the head too much. Okay. Slowly things are turning. They're going back to what God wanted them to be in the beginning. That's a class unto itself, a whole semester of class that I could do. I did it once years ago. Maybe I should do it again. Anyway, let's get back to Passover. So that's what the Passover is. It also is the Passover from slavery into freedom. Okay, not just that the angel of death did not kill the Jewish children, but that the people left slavery in Egypt to go into the freedom of the Sinai Peninsula, which is a strange freedom because they wandered around for 40 years in that little peninsula. That's that piece of land between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. There's a small land bridge that goes from Egypt into what we now call Israel or Palestine. It's Palestinian territory. It's where they're doing all the fighting right now, the Gaza Strip. Okay, that little piece of land going into is the country of Israel. So it's been there a long time. But you'll learn to hear how the people of Israel crossed into this peninsula. I won't get into today how they traveled for 40 years around that thing, just traveling and traveling and traveling. Okay, I won't talk about that. We'll get into that another time. All right, so let me get to reading. So I'm reading from Exodus chapter 12, verses 21 and through pretty much 13, even to 14. I can't remember where I left off last time. Okay, so here it goes. Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and procure lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover victims. Then take a bunch of hyssop and dipping it in the blood that is in the basin, apply some of the blood to the lintels and the two doorposts." So around the door frame, the main door to your house. "And none of you shall go outdoors until morning. For when the Lord goes by to strike down the Egyptians, seeing the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over that door and not let the destroyer come into your houses to strike you down." Oh, it's better with my glasses on. Yeah, it does. New glasses, so now I can actually read better. I forgot. "You will keep this practice forever as a statute for yourselves and your descendants. Thus, when you have entered the land which the Lord will give you, as he promised, you must observe this rite. When your children ask you, 'What does this rite of yours mean?' you will reply, 'It is the Passover sacrifice for the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. When he struck down the Egyptians, he delivered our houses. Houses meaning family groups. Then the people knelt and bowed down, and the Israelites went and did exactly as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And so at midnight, the Lord struck down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeons, as well as all the firstborn of the animals. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was loud wailing throughout Egypt, for there was not a house without its dead. Give me a second. Oops. Oh. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Leave my people at once, you and the Israelites. Go and serve the Lord as you said. Take your flocks too and your herds, as you said, and go. Bless me too." That's pretty desperate. According to them, this God of theirs had just wiped their people out or took away their other firstborn sons and their animals as well. That's kind of a big deal. If you think about it, we breed animals from the males, not from the females. So if you kill the firstborn bull, firstborn sheep, firstborn whatever, you've pretty much ruined your flocks. Matter of fact, you'd have one bull for a lot of cows. And if that bull is suddenly dead, yeah, I guess you can always find a bull, but it's just not the same. Huh? That's how devastating this was for them. The Egyptians, in a hurry to send them away from the land, urged the people on, for they said, "All of us will die." The people therefore took their dough, dough for bread, before it was leavened, in their kneading bowls, strapped it to their cloaks on their shoulders. And the Israelites did as Moses had commanded. They asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. Indeed, the Lord had made the Egyptians so well disposed toward the people that they let them have whatever they asked. And so they despoiled the Egyptians. This is a seriously frightened people, just handing over gold and silver to these people who are their slaves. The Israelites set out from Ramesses, for Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, not counting the children. A crowd of mixed ancestry also went up with them, with livestock in great abundance, both flocks and herds. A couple of points there. One is that Ramses to Sukkot was kind of in the south, right? So they went down to escape. I was telling you about that land bridge between Egypt crossing into what is now Palestine, would be southern Israel, which would be the shortest way, and it's going to mention that. But they went further south to cross. So when they crossed the sea, well, I'll get to that point in a moment, okay? The other thing is there's 600,000 men. They're not counting the women and the kids. 600,000 men. It's a lot of men, right? It's a lot of people. Remember, there's 12 tribes. That means, just to make it even, that's 50,000 men per tribe that are crossing. It's a lot of guys. That's a lot of men. Yeah, it's a big group of people. But that number is not a mistake, or not. It's not just a vague number, an accidental number, because the number 5, whenever we hear numbers in the Old Testament in particular, it always has a relationship to the 7 days of creation. Okay, so the 5th day of creation, what was that day? I'm going to read it to you. Why not? It's right here in the Bible. God said, "Let the water teem with an abundance of living creatures, and on the earth let birds fly beneath the dome of the sky." God created the great sea monsters and all kinds of crawling living creatures with which the water teems, and all kinds of winged birds. God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile, multiply, and fill the water of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." Evening came, and morning followed, the fifth day. So God made all the sea creatures and stuff, and the birds. Those are the creatures that were not killed in the great flood of Noah. Okay? Spoiler alert, if you didn't know. All right? When Noah created the ark, he didn't need any of the sea creatures because the earth was full of water. And any animal that can live in the water was fine. The birds, somehow also were able to be fine as well. Okay, although there were birds on the ark, of course, we know that. But this is kind of a strange thing that happened. The meaning of it is most important because land animals and human beings were all created on the sixth day. So by having 600,000 men, 50,000 men per tribe, suddenly moving out of Egypt, it's a big reminder, that something wonderful is going to happen. The sixth day is coming, a new creation. A whole new world is going to be created. It's a beautiful little thing that we can think about. It's a beautiful little meditation. They took also peoples that says mixed race. So people who are partial Jewish or whatever they were. They were part of the families. They were slaves mostly. And they were taken with them as well because they're part of the household. And they took their animals with them. They were literally like a massive Noah's Ark that was now leaving Egypt. And that's the image that you should have, from all the movies we saw about Noah and the ark, right? And all the animals on the ship, and then they're coming out, and the land finally after 40 days and nights of rain, and then many more days and nights of being out on the ocean, and then they were ready to come onto dry land and repopulate the earth. It's a whole new recreation, That's the feeling that Passover gives to the Jews. That's why they celebrate it every year, because they were being reborn again. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing that happened. And the fact that they spent 40 years, Noah, 40 days and 40 nights it was raining. And the Jews were going to spend 40 years wandering in the desert. Okay? It's a whole new rebirth, a whole new recreation of what the human person is. And not only the human person, but also all the creatures of the world, the land as well. It's a lot. You just meditate on that and you think about that. This is absolutely wonderful. What we are celebrating in Jesus Christ, all right? We'll get to that part. But for now, let's go back to the Passover, okay? Okay. The Israelites set out for, okay, I already said, I went there. Oh, yeah. The dough that was the bread that they hadn't cooked yet. The dough they had brought out of Egypt, they baked into unleavened loaves. It was not leavened because they had been driven out of Egypt and could not wait. They did not even prepare food for the journey. So this is just raw dough, and it was just going to be basically it's going to be tortillas. It was just or that flat pita bread, delicious stuff. Leaven makes dough rise, etc. The time the Israelites had stayed in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on this very date, all the armies of the Lord left the land of Egypt. This was a night of vigil for the Lord when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. So on this night, all Israelites must keep a vigil for the Lord throughout the generations. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the Passover statute." Okay, this is a ruling that goes on. Okay, now I'm going to jump from there to the actual crossing of the Red Sea. There we go. Now we're in chapter 13 at verse 17. Okay, so they've escaped. They're kind of heading southish. Instead of going north, they go southish. The Israelites lived in a land, it was called Goshen. Some people say Goshen. Okay, it was kind of where, if you go look at a map, there's Cairo in the north, and it was kind of off to the east, just a tad south, and that's the land that they were given. Right, not the best land. But it was livable. They had enough water for themselves, but they were being persecuted, so it wasn't good. But they kept growing. There was a lot of Jews, a lot of people. But now they were going a little further south in order to make their escape. Instead of heading to the land bridge, which would have been the shortest way, but God has a plan here, see? Here we go. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the Philistines' land, that's the north bridge, though this was the nearest. For God said, if the people see that they have to fight, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. Yes, they would have. Instead, God rerouted them toward the Red Sea by way of the wilderness road, and Israelites went up out of the land of Egypt, arrayed for battle. Moses also took Joseph's bones with him. This was Joseph, who was the father of the 12 sons, or the founder of the 12 tribes. So they've kept these bones around for 400 years, okay? For Joseph had made the Israelites take a solemn oath, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you must bring my bones up with you from here. They mummified him, probably. Like we found the Egyptian mummies, you can be around for thousands of years as a mummified body. So that's probably what they did. Setting out from Sukkot, they camped at Etham, near the edge of the wilderness. The Lord preceded them in the daytime by means of a column of cloud to show them the way, and at night by means of a column of fire to give them light. Thus they could travel both day and night. Neither the column of cloud by day nor the column of fire by night ever left in place in front of them, never left its place in front of them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the Israelites. Let them turn about and come before Pi Hachirot, between Migdol and the sea. Camp in front of Baal Zephon, just opposite by the sea. Pharaoh will then say the Israelites are wandering about aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. I will so harden Pharaoh's heart that he will pursue them. Thus I will receive glory through Pharaoh and all his arms, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. This the Israelites did. When it was reported to the king of Egypt that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart about the people. What in the world have we done? They said. We have released Israel from our service. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariots and took his army with him. He took 600 select chariots and all the chariots of Egypt, with officers on all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites while they were going out in triumph. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen, and his army, and caught up with them as they lay encamped by the sea at Pi Hachirot, in front of Baal Zephon. Now Pharaoh was near when the Israelites looked up and saw that the Egyptians had set out after them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. To Moses, they said, were there no burial places in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Did we not tell you that in Egypt, when we said, leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? Far better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses answered the people, do not fear. Stand your ground and see the victory the Lord will win for you today. That's a good phrase for you to learn and memorize for every situation where you realize people are just dumping on you and you go, this ain't right. Stand your ground. The Lord will win the victory for you. I like that. That's pretty cool. I think I'm going to make that into a sign somewhere. Okay. For these Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to keep still. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to set out. And you lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and split it in two, that the Israelites may pass through the sea on dry land. But I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will receive glory through Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. The angel of God who had been leading Israel's army now moved and went around behind them. And the column of cloud moving from it in front of them took up its place behind them, so that it came between the Egyptian army and that of Israel. And when it became dark, the cloud illumined the night, and so the rival camps did not come any closer together all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all night long, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, so that the Israelites entered into the midst of the sea on dry land, with the water as a wall to their right and to their left. The Egyptians followed in pursuit after them. Oh, excuse me. All Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen into the midst of the sea. But during the watch, just before dawn, the Lord looked down from a column of fiery cloud upon the Egyptian army and threw it into a panic. And he so clogged their chariot wheels that they could drive only with difficulty. With that, the Egyptians said, let us flee from Israel, because the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may flow back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal flow. The Egyptians were fleeing head on toward it when the Lord cast the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. And as the water flowed back, it covered the chariots and the horsemen of all Pharaoh's army, which had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not even one escaped. But the Israelites had walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, with the water as a wall to their right and to their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel on that day from the power of Egypt. When Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the seashore, and saw the great power that the Lord had shown against Egypt, the people feared the Lord. They believed in the Lord and in Moses, his servant. For a while. Then they went back to their old ways and started complaining. That's another part of the story. All right, so the meaning of all this for us, for you in particular, okay? This time is celebrating that wonderful victory, that escape It means new life to Jewish people. Okay, I've already explained that, with the whole thing about 50,000 men from the 12 tribes equals 600,000 men. Okay, they did not fight a battle with armies of men's weapons. The Lord was the one. He told them, stand your ground. And they did. The army of the Pharaohs was confused because the Lord had created this massive storm in which they were in a darkness and a cloud. They couldn't see what there was going on. They couldn't even move. And that's when he allowed the Israelite people to escape calmly going through the waters. Whatever you see in movies, ignore. Okay, they're being dramatic and it's silly. All right, it was a calm procession. There was no panic. They were not running for their lives. They were marching in proper battle array. Now, how do you do that? You have 600,000 men, but you have a lot of women and a lot of kids and all these foreigners, people from other races that were part of the group, and yet all these animals. They were not running in a panic. Ignore the movies. They marched. It was a victory march out of slavery. The army of Pharaoh was a mess. And when they passed through, then the army was allowed to go into the waters, and that's where God drowned them. Okay? One thing I want to point out, something very important. During this whole thing, everybody had the freedom to make choices. Nobody was doing something against their will. God made Pharaoh's heart hardened, or be hardened. That doesn't mean that he was manipulating Pharaoh like a puppet. It just means that God allowed Pharaoh to make his stupid decisions. Pharaoh at any time could have decided to let his heart be softened towards these people. But he had hardened his heart from long before, forgetting everything that the people had done, the reason why the Jewish people were there at all, what Joseph did to save the kingdom of Egypt and make the kingdom prosperous. Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob, okay, who was the father of the 12 tribes. I made a mistake earlier. It was Joseph's body that they took. Sorry, not Jacob's. Jacob, they was gone. Okay. But Joseph was mummified so they could take him. They took him to be buried in the new land. Okay. Anyway, at any time, the people were like, we don't want to go. Okay, but we're going to go because you're warning us. We're going to go. And there were lots of signs that let the people know, okay, Moses hasn't steered us wrong so far. And if he says we got to go, we got to go. We got a chance here to get out of here. And they saw what happened with the death of the firstborn, and they realized, hey, this could work. And then they went around and people were giving them gold and silver and clothes and things to take with them. And they go, hey, this is great. And they started on their march. But then decisions were made and they weren't sure. They had to trust because they really didn't know what was going on. They just had to trust that Moses knew what he was doing. Okay? At any time, anybody could have said no. Maybe there were people that said, I'm not going, we're staying. Go. I'm sticking around. Bye. I'm giving up on this whole thing of being Jewish and, following God, whatever. I'm staying. Who knows? Obviously, there were people who were not Jews, who were part of their households, their slaves or the servants, whatever they were. And they said, hey, we're with you. Okay, we're going with you. They could have said no. They could have stayed. But they went. This whole thing about the freedom of a person to decide, to choose, to stay with God, to go with him. God does care for us, and God carries us, yes. but there's a freedom in it. You and I exhibit that all the time. We sin. We make our decisions that God is not pleased with. We violate the strict rules that we have received from God, from the Ten Commandments, that we continue. And the church has laid them out, how those rules apply in daily life to the decisions you need to make. We're very strong on that. And yes, we're going to start talking about that a lot more after Easter, getting you ready for your confession and for your first communion and your confirmation. And for those of you to be baptized, and there's a few of you, quite a few of you actually, getting you ready for coming into full life with Christ. But you must leave behind these old ways. This is what we celebrate with what Jesus is doing this week. Now, I'm going to make another video later today, and it's going to talk about what's happening tonight, what we call the Last Supper, or we call the Lord's Supper. It's what the Mass is, what we do when we come to Mass, every day. But in this moment, you need to make that decision. Do you really want to be free? Do you want to enter into this life with Jesus Christ? Because what he did this week and what he suffered, all the things he was saying, all the suffering he would go through to be resurrected from the dead, was the same thing as the Passover. And Jesus being the new Moses, if you want to call him that. Some people do. We do sometimes make that image of it. But he's more than a Moses, right? Still, he's the first one to cross over. He did the Passover from death to life. He went into the grave. Now, it's not unheard of. And we have examples in the Old Testament of Enoch, the prophet Elijah, and the prophet Elisha were literally taken up into heaven, body and soul. Okay? So we know that resurrection from the dead, that life everlasting beyond this place, has always been the plan of God. But we lost it. It's from our minds, from our hearts. We lost this whole idea of living forever with the Lord. Maybe we had some idea, maybe something good is going to happen. We don't know what it was beyond here. We just had dreams and hopes. But we lost the reality of what it means for us. Jesus restores that by being the first one to actually die. Enoch, Elijah, and Elisha, they didn't die. They just went straight from here to heaven. Okay? Just like the Virgin Mary. Jesus was murdered. He died. He was buried. And then he rose again. This is the real Passover. The Passover of forever. And that's what we're celebrating. Okay, guys, God bless you. And I'll talk to you later today, okay? Another little video.